A segunda pergunta é de quem?
Peraí, aqui. Hi everyone, we are live.
Hello, everybody. My name is Virgilio Viana. Happy to be with you all here in this kickoff meeting of our course. Um, I'm speaking from a very non-Amazonian location. I'm on a sabbatical leave in London. I'm at the IIED, the International Institute for the Environment and Development, and it's a great pleasure to be with all of you here. Uh, you can see in this screen Mariana Pavan, who is our teaching assistant. And Mariana, I'd like to thank you for helping organize all of this. And Mariana is going to be giving support to our program all along. So in the forum, in the chat, in all of this, you're going to be able to interact with Mariana. So I would like to present her and so that you can put a face. Okay, so Mariana, thank you so much. Well, the way this is going to work is that you'll be able to send questions, and Mariana during this 1 hour session. Let me begin by just expressing to you a few words the current situation where I see forests and the planet on the base of just a couple of events of the last week or so. I have just come back from a visit to China, where I participated in an eco-compensation workshop. This was organized by the Chinese Academy of Sciences and the Asian Development Bank and a number of other organizations like IUCN, WWF, and others. Came back very impressed with the determination of the government of China to, on large scale, restoration of forests in slopes. Actually, this is not a new program, but what is new is that since 2013, Xi Jinping of China has put of an eco-civilization as an important objective of the government of China. So they're investing heavily on reforestation of slopes and on cleaning the air. And for that, forests play a very important role. So I think we have some light from China in this regard as it relates to forests. And also to climate change, because reduction of pollution has to do with emission reductions as well, and changing, especially moving from coal to solar, and also moving into other kinds of renewable energies. They still have a big challenge as China becomes an important international player, and the big challenge is to bring the same high standards of environmental goals to Chinese activities outside of the country, both those that are supported by the Chinese government and those that are implemented by Chinese companies. So I think there's still a big agenda there. The other point I'd like to highlight in the past few weeks is from another global leader, probably the most important global leader that we have today, which is Pope Francis. And I'm actually going next week to the Vatican to participate in a meeting at Casina Pio IV at the Pontifical Academy of Sciences of the Vatican, which is going to be discussing how the encyclical Laudato Si of Pope Francis relates to a number of issues, including conservation of forests, restoration of and forest resources. So I think we have another positive source of inspiration from that I think together with Chinese Xi Jinping is source of optimism. Two positive notes that we, we see we see a very dangerous situation planet, especially as it relates to climate change, and probably fires in California forests are a very obvious indicator of how changing in weather patterns can result in big risks for forests, and this results also in risks. Oh, there's a very interesting set of research coming out on first the risk fires as increasing globally. A paper published earlier this year in Science shows that tropical forests are becoming clearly the sources of CO2 and other gases rather than sinks. And this trend is likely to continue and increase in the future. And another piece of research, which is actually several papers showing that these fire is also having sorry, having for human health, um, and this respiratory diseases also to include cardiovascular diseases. So, having said this, I'd just like to open the floor, and so Mariana, as I said, is collecting those questions and sending to me via Skype. But I already have here two questions. One from Carolina, which was posted in the forum, and she asks about the challenges for enterprises, how to link community-based tourism in resources, since resources are often not available, and also human resources for monitoring, which are often not available. So those challenges on community-based forest enterprises. Well, I think that this challenge of financing community-based enterprises is one that has to do with accessing new types of funding, in addition to traditional types of funding. Traditional types of funding mean access to public banks that can provide finance and government-sponsored programs. There was a very interesting seminar that I attended a couple of weeks ago, and this was the Natural Capital Forum. And in the Natural Capital Forum, talked about blended financing mechanisms that combine grants with the loans. And the grants are used to reduce the risk of, which are often conventional banks as being too risky. So having a match fund or from grants is a way of de-risking those enterprises and make them to commercial banks. And this is an area where there is a lot of activity and a lot of new mechanisms. So I really encourage you to look on those blended and uh, venture philanthropy, which is also another concept which is used for that kind of purpose. Philanthropists who are interested in promoting sustainable businesses and willing to take the risk. So if these enterprises fail, they would be considered, if they are successful, then they're considered investment. And there are a number of those initiatives, uh, including through the UN system, including funds, special funds. Althelia Fund is one of those funds that is working. We have, in the case of Latin America, a number of projects being funded through this Althelia 100 million euro fund, if I'm not mistaken, that is investing in agroforestry and other landscape activities that include trees in one way or another. Of human resources for community-based forest enterprises, I think we have a big challenge there because we have to encourage training, especially of the young, so as to avoid migration from rural communities, rural and forest communities to cities, and thereby losing a lot of the young talents that we have in, in those communities. So I think there again there are a number of positive stories that come to my mind. One of those is implemented by FAS, where we are doing a number of great activities to engage uh, teenagers and young adults in the sustainable development agenda. And this includes forest management, fisheries management, and community-based tourism. And, and I think education is a key element for success of community-based enterprises that rely on forest resources. All right, so here's another question. The question is about the management and restoration um, of degraded forest ecosystems. This is a question from Nigeria, where they have Ebola viruses and other diseases associated with forests which are degraded. So the question is, what are the plans for restoration of degraded ecosystems in relation to SDG 15, and how to deal with the fact that many companies are associated with those uh, degradation processes and are not punished. Okay, well, then there's a couple of ways of addressing this question. First is to say that there is a growing number of players in this area of restoration. There is an initiative which is led by WRI, World Resources Institute, and this is um, uh, an initiative that the aim is to have large-scale restoration through a number of innovative partnerships, and you can look it up in the internet, and there are a number of very interesting things happening throughout the world, and especially in Latin America. Very promising, which are bringing a lot of attention and being able to gather funding at a scale which is really impressive. I have already mentioned China, which is doing a lot of work in restoration, and and my to the Chinese government when I was in this conference last week in China, it was that China should also export the same approach to forest restoration in conjunction with development projects which are being funded by China, especially in Africa, but also in other parts of the world, in Asia and Latin America. Because if one is building an infrastructure project which will be in one way or another associated with agricultural production, it's essential to maintain a healthy ecosystem around that new infrastructure to make sure that this infrastructure is eventually paid by these new economic activities. So protecting forests is essential, especially as it relates to maintaining river flows. Watershed conservation is essential part of sustainable agricultural production. I should also mention, in terms of restoration, the fact that we have a huge challenge associated with desertification of ecosystems around the world. And this includes the dry parts of sub-Saharan Africa, where desertification is increasing at a high pace. We have the whole Middle East, where there is a lot of problems with desertification, and this is likely to increase, unfortunately. I have seen a very worrisome presentation about temperatures in the Middle East, how they are increasing, the number of days with temperature above 50 degrees, 54 degrees actually, and the number of days is greater than 60 days per year. And it's just amazing to see that not only this is critical, but this is likely to increase in the coming years and decades. So trees play an important role as not only a source of shade for impoverished communities which do not have access to air conditioning, but also a source of fiber, source of fruits. So tree planting in these areas is critical. Another component of this question is about punishing companies that are responsible for degrading forests. And there is some very interesting new initiatives associated with value chains, linking the forest footprint of soybean production, of meat production, and other products. There are a number of organizations working on this. I would like to mention Amazon, which is a research institution in the Amazon, which is doing fantastic work linking meat production industries with the footprint of the farms that provide the animals for those meat production factories. And they are able to identify the source of the supply of these meat packers, and thereby pressing them to make sure that they are not encouraging deforestation. And this is also being supported by public attorneys, which make these companies liable for their activities. So I think engaging good research, civil society activism, and public attorneys is one way of making sure that these companies are punished, fines, or through boycotts, which is another way which is very effective. And this is not to say that or regular governmental programs to punish illegal logging, illegal activities in the forests are not working. But I think we should be looking for innovative approaches, and the C is creating links to between research, activism, and punishment. So I think that there is a lot of uh, sources of inspiration from those activities that are taking place. Um, um, well, um, let me turn to Mariana and see if you would like to bring up another question that has come to you, uh, Mariana. Is
Yes.
Oh, I
Hi.
have a question here. Oh, I just got a question from you. So from Veronica Sheng, and the question is: you have spoken about our challenge in protecting and managing the forest sustainably, especially in Latin America, where we have important issues related to governance, legal framework, and corruption. As young foreigners, we are aware of the difficulties related with natural resources conservation we face. And we'd like to ask you where we can start focusing our efforts in order to preserve forests. So the question is focus the efforts of young forestry professionals, um, given the challenges associated with governance, legal framework, and corruption. Well, I've just mentioned the issue of the slaughterhouses, which are very important. And I think that the that we have to pursue is uh, first to make the information available to society that people oftentimes are a part of the problem, although they don't realize it. For example, if you are buying um, a piece of furniture, that furniture may illegal timber, and that illegal timber may be a source or a driver of forest degradation or deforestation. So I think if you're looking for a strategy, I would say that we have to make society as a whole more aware of first the impacts of their uh, purchasing power for the bad and for the good. So if they can shift behavior from purchasing goods that are associated with deforestation to buying those that come from sustainable management, that is very positive. Second is boycotting products that are associated with those illegal activities. Um, and the other challenge is not only to provide the evidence, but also to communicate this effectively to society as a whole. So I think it's really very important to develop a communication strategy at all levels, at the national level, at the state, at the municipal level. And oftentimes people are simply not aware. To me, another strategic focus is to link uh, forests and human health. Forest fires, such as those that we've seen in California these last few days, or that we have seen in Brazil earlier this year, or as we have seen in Europe and in Africa and in Asia, increasingly more frequent and increasingly more This has an impact on air pollution and making the link between forest health and societal health or human health, I think is probably one of the most effective way of convincing policymakers that protecting forests is important. I have had an experience being in government, and I think usually politicians um, look after votes, and there are two things that are very important for people all over the world. First is jobs, and second is health. So if you can, we can encourage job creation through sustainable use of forests. This is a plus. We can convince uh, policymakers to do that, and that can be an important source of uh, creating an environment that encourage business and economic actors to promote sustainable use of forests. The other is health, and I mentioned to you earlier in this meeting about China. And the reason why China is cleaning up its air, it's because of health issues. So there is a lot of concern in China that this is an issue that affects not only the well-being of people, but also it has an economic cost of providing health care for ill people. So the more we can link the two issues, jobs and health, to forest management, forest conservation, or forest degradation, I think the more likely we are to uh, get policies that encourage forest stewardship. Let me mention also the case of Chile. I was very well surprised with the presentation made by the Minister of Environment of Chile just a couple of weeks ago, in which he presented a very ambitious program in Chile. And the motivation for this, that part of Chilean President Bachelet, is because of connection to human health. So Santiago is a very polluted city, and this was an important political issue that uh, gave the support for the Ministry of Environment to draft a number of innovative policies. Let me also mention a conversation I had with the governor of California, Jerry Brown, who mentioned something very similar. He said, well, California is going for very green policies, and the reason for this is because he actually mentioned two things. He mentioned one was the effects on of air pollution on human health, and the second is that he believes that people going outdoors to national parks and other protected areas creates a bond, a spiritual bond, an emotional bond between people and nature, and that creates the environment that stimulates governments to invest in green policies as a whole. Um, okay, so Veronica, I hope that answers your question. I have here another question from Jessica Duarte. And she says that she would like to ask about the forest's population access to energy. Which are their options? What are their effects in the ecosystems? I know this may be a vast subject, so I'd like to know if there are any studies or documents that I could read. Um, Peter May is also following the webinar and is on the chat saying that let me know if I can reinforce anything. Well, Peter, welcome. It's great that you are here. Peter May is a distinguished researcher and professor on ecological economics, and it's a part of our group here, and we're very happy to have Peter. Um, so Peter, we have this question from Jessica. I asked Mariana to share this question with Peter. So if you want to comment this, you're more than welcome. Let me just say, Jessica, that access to energy is a huge challenge for forest communities for a very simple reason. Forest communities are usually in remote areas, and the solution based on just expanding the grid is first very expensive because they're long transmission lines for very small consumption, and second, that the cost of maintenance of these transmission lines is very high, especially in the tropics where uh, trees grow so fast that within a couple of years, trees are taller than the transmission lines. So any storm can result in tree falls, and these tree falls create interruption, and it's very hard to find where that particular tree fell. If we're talking about the 20, 30 kilometers transmission line. And this is a reality that I'm very familiar with because I go very frequently to the Negro River, and the communities there, more than 50% of the time, they have no electricity, and the reason is tree falls. And the solution for this is, in my view, is to have decentralized off-grid power energy generation. And this can be solar or hybrid systems. Uh, we have tested together with Schneider Electric a hybrid system which is solar and diesel. Because what happens in areas with high cloud cover is that during some periods of the year, some months of high cloud cover, the generation from solar is not enough, and that would require huge areas of solar panels, making it more expensive. So the solution that was designed by this group, led by Schneider Electric, but also that involved the Federal University of Amazonas and several other institutions, including FAS, was to have these hybrid systems. So when the energy goes below a certain level in the battery bank, then and not only produces energy but also recharges the battery pack bank, and then goes off automatically, and that lasts for a number of hours again. So, and by then maybe the sun is back, so the electricity is continuously provided. Um, so that is one strategy. There are other communities where we can have uh, river-based power generation, and there are some very interesting new technologies using floating turbines that don't require dams. They're just turbines that are floating in the river, and they use the current of the river to produce energy, and this is fine. There are some areas where wind power is okay, and there are also areas where biomass, including forest biomass, can generate electricity. There is a case um, that comes to my mind, which is near Manaus, in the town of Itacoatiara, where there is a company that does sustainable forest management, and the waste of the sawmill is used to generate some 4 megawatts of energy, and that's enough to supply the small city where it is located. I see a comment from Peter um, that one interesting option in areas under forest management wood residues from sawmills for local thermal generation instead of burning into the atmosphere. Well, we thought of the same alternative, and actually, what Peter May is saying something very relevant to areas where there are lots of sawmills, and it's not only a way of generating energy, but also using air pollution, because if you have um, a, a thermal plant, you have the chance of having a chimney which is tall enough, smoke that is produced is not um, a source of local pollution because it goes into a higher altitude. So it's also a way of dealing with a huge problem of air pollution. This is very common in areas where there are many sawmills, parts of the world where this is a huge problem. You can have um, management for that purpose. You can also have reforestation using fast-growing trees, exotic species or native species, to produce a biomass for that purpose. And in many areas of the world, planting of fast-growing trees is very appropriate for that. And I would mention the example of our good old friend who is now gone, Wangara Maathai, who for a movement for 1 billion trees for women uh, to supply their needs of cooking fuel wood. And this was basically using eucalyptus and acacia in very small lots, not large scale plantations. And this is an initiative that not only brought a lot of attention, a lot of resources, but also that could deserve even more investment. I think that uh, planting trees like those be very valuable to reduce pressure on existing natural forests. So planting small lots of fast-growing trees can be a source of fuel for cooking. And to mention, there's a very interesting little gadget that I saw, which is a cooking stove which produces electricity. Cooking stove generates electricity or generates water vapor, and this water vapor pumps a small device to generate electricity. This is great. Actually, Mariana, if you could share a video, I have a little video, just remind me, I can post that video. It's an invention of a crazy guy who is now being sold, um, and I think there again, I think we have many new opportunities for innovation. And I should mention that innovation, an area, especially for those of you who are in young professionals. Um, the world is thirsty for innovation, and I think we have a great set of opportunities to link um, ecosystem services to production of fuel wood, and linking that to um, sustainable products certified that can access to some markets, maybe can deserve tax incentives through green policies. So we have to think outside of the box so as to encourage forest use. I'm not sure, Mariana, can you um, put Peter with a voice in here, or only through message? Mariana?
Hi, Virgilio. I don't think we're prepared to put Peter on the screen, but he's on the chat following us. So whatever he tells us, I can forward his answers to you.
Okay. Well, in the next session, let's see if we can invite Peter to also have access to voice message, because that would be great. Um, so, anything else, Mariana, that comes through you? Oh, uh, okay. Um, well, I see here a question about certification. What is the role of certification um, in the future forests? Well, I think certification tool. I have had the privilege of being one of the founding members of FSC, Forest Stewardship Council, in the early 90s. So this is a while ago. And FSC has been successful to some extent and has also failed to some extent. It has been successful in promoting good management practices in plantation forestry and in temperate forestry, but it has been a failure in promoting sustainable tropical forest management, and even more so, sustainable community-based forestry in the tropics. And this is, I think, a reflect of the fact that certification is not a panacea. Certification by itself is not sufficient to change a whole sector. So the case of plantation is a sector which is self-sufficient, and in general, um, forestry practices are good, the economics are good, it's viable to produce um, plantation for different uses. So certification was an added on value that encouraged good management practices. And this was generally positive. Of course, things vary from one case to the other, but in general, certification for plantation forestry was positive, especially to improve the social relations of forest companies with local communities, and to improve also landscape level management, including the protection of native forests inside plantations as a source of uh, enemies of uh, pests and diseases, which is a very important contribution of natural of forests in the landscape. But when we go into management of tropical forests, this is a sector where there are many structural problems. First is land tenure, and land tenure is a serious limitation of uh, sustainable forestry in the tropics. We have also the problem of too bureaucratic legislation that is a barrier, especially to communities which don't have access to internet, have high rates of illiteracy. So in those communities, the bureaucracy becomes a barrier too, and certification may just make even worse because the way certification has moved is to become a very bureaucratic exercise as well. So the life of those communities engaged in tropical forest management even more difficult. There's a very interesting discussion within FSC now, which is to have a different treatment for community-based forestry. So as instead of following these very detailed and written procedures, uh, use more local knowledge and oral uh, uh, rules for management, which is the way indigenous communities handle good management practices. So FSC has a process for the forest stewardship has a process um, uh, which is currently ongoing to create a new set of criteria, especially aimed at tropical forest small scale enterprises. And I think this is a very correct approach. We have other types of certification, and this includes organic and fair trade. And for some products, this kind of certification is more appropriate, especially if we're talking about forest products that uh, food products like fruits, for example, like acai berry or Brazil nut or um, my, um, all fruits from tropical and temperate and subtropical forests. And those products usually benefit more from organic certification because consumers give higher value to organic products. Then there's another type of certification which is fair trade, very big in some countries like Holland, for example, where coffee comes from uh, fair trade certification to a very large extent. And this is a way of encourage um, social benefits of production systems. So my response to you is that yes, forest certification can play a very important role in promoting sound forestry management practices. Okay, good. So what else do we have here? Well, forests and climate change. Um, the link between forests and climate change is one which is becoming clear and clear. I have already mentioned the effect of increasing droughts into um, into forest fires. So this is a real big threat. My view is that probably this is one of the most important agendas in the coming years. So I think this is an area where we should give great attention to forest fires. Another question from Dominique Raymond from Haiti. Ecosystem in Haiti seems to be in an incredible situation. Barely no forests, no birds, how do you see the way to forward to restore degraded forest ecosystems? Well, Dominique, yeah, the situation in Haiti, fortunately, not only is incredible, as you say, but also, unfortunately, there are many other areas in the world where we have similar levels of degradation. My approach to this kind of landscape, which used to be forests and now is very eroded and low quality pasture or abandoned agricultural land, is to invest in restoration. And there, I think, in the case of Haiti, I would say that uh, the Green Climate Fund should be an ideal source of funding for massive and large-scale restoration to restore rivers and watersheds. And I think this could be linked to carbon sequestration and also to social programs. Uh, and the great thing of restoration is that it's labor intensive. And jobs is also an important agenda for Haiti. So what I would suggest is to do uh, to prepare a project for a large-scale restoration of Haiti. There are many success stories of restoration of ecosystems similar to Haiti. So the silvicultural technology is there. Um, One case that comes to mind is the initiative led by Sebastião Salgado, the photographer and good friend, who has created an institute called the Earth Institute, Instituto Terra, and he's able to restore over 600 hectares of a property, and that resulted in restoration of the small creeks, and the wildlife started to come back. Uh, it's hard when you have a very degraded ecosystem and you don't have sources of native animals to recolonize in the forest. But I think it's doable. There's a lot of resilience in forests, so I would strongly encourage you to work on a project for uh, not only the Green Climate Fund, but also other funds that can have similar interest. Another question from Dominique Raymond. Um, um, yeah, it is again what to do with degraded forests in Haiti, and I, as I was mentioning before, this could be linked to carbon sequestration, to SDG number one, which is so the way of dealing with that is to one approach to deal with that is to create jobs for uh, uh, low low skilled workers, and also uh, not only to restore natural ecosystems but also to plant trees which could provide that. And I would envision in a climate like Haiti to have fruit production associated with the industrialization of fruits, and that could also generate added value for the economy of Haiti. So these are my thoughts. And as we are approaching our time, I'd like to invite back Mariana to join us here. Um, and Mariana, what are the next steps? Oh, we have a last question here from Rashida Attar from India, so from Mumbai. Um, he from social sciences background, is studying mobile forests, and wanted to your views on rainforests of India. Well, India is a very different part of the world with a very high population density compared to areas in Latin America, and but at the same time a very rich culture. So what I would say to you is that would be a very promising approach to see how you could link traditional ethno-ecological knowledge of nearby or inside forest landscapes, and use that ethno-ecological uh, knowledge to engage in restoration. Air pollution is a big issue in India, especially in places like Mumbai. So I think if from a policy perspective, if you can highlight the importance of forests in cleaning up the air and reducing the temperature, and providing not only these ecosystem services but also products such as firewood and fruits and timber. I think that could be a way of moving ahead this agenda in India. And with that last question, I'll turn to Mariana. Mariana, what are our next steps?
Hi, Virgilio. So we're approaching the end of our first live Q&A. We'll be announcing shortly the date and time for the second one. And for all the students, I also would like to thank them and let them know that if you have any references, videos, or any other materials that you would like to send to the students, then we'll make sure to be posting on the discussion forum briefly.
Excellent. Excellent. Thank you, Mariana. Thank you, Peter May, who has joined us in the call. And thank you all for participating in this kickoff session, and hope to see you soon. All the
Okay.
best.
Bye bye.
Okay, ciao.